Yo, how are you doing, folks? Welcome to episode 110 of the Simpa Life. That sounds weird. 110, 110 of the Simpa Life podcast. Whatever it is, you know what we're doing here. We're moving along every week with another guest discussing another untouched topic within our culture and society. This week's guest is the first of our four-timer club. As I think I mentioned previously when we maybe had him on, we're not going to do the whole jacket thing like the SNL. There is no tokens. There is no fancy T-shirt. Although actually maybe as we develop as a podcast, I might send out little badges. I think that'd be pretty cool. But yeah, anyway, I digress. We'll move on today because I really want to get talking to today's guest because there are some good revelations that I think we need to discuss. There's some interesting topics around the law, especially around cannabis and driving, that I think needs addressing. Obviously, today's guest has been on the podcast sometimes before discussing this topic. I think they've advanced quite a bit in this area and have a lot to update us on. So without further ado, we'll move on to the introduction of today's guest, who is a cannabis advocate, campaigner, and the former compliance director of the CTA. They are the chairman of the cannabis think tank Hemptank and the founder of the Seed Our Future cannabis campaign. They are Guy Coxall. How are you doing, brother?
Very good, thank you. Thanks for having us on again, Simpa. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. I think we always cover some brilliant topics when have you on the podcast, and we always end up sort of advancing this kind of movement around understanding the laws and the nuance of sort of the legislation. So I think it's always important to get you back in the hot seat. And to be fair, I enjoyed chatting shit with you, so you're more than welcome.
Cool, thanks.
Sweet. I suppose for anybody that maybe hasn't seen previous episodes, I think you were on episode 62 back in January last year. Could you give us sort of a quick refresher, a bit of an insight as to sort of your story and how you ended up in this position?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in the industry quite a long time. As you mentioned, I started off in the Cannabis Trade Association, took on the role of compliance director. So I was very interested in, making sure that the industry was self-regulated, that products were what they said on the label and so on. I tried working with government departments, the MHRA, the Home Office, etc. And I realised, we were getting nowhere. One step forward, two steps back. So after a little bit of consideration, I decided to leave the CTA and go on more of a campaign sort of side of things, which was the development of Seed Our Future. So we've been running for over 3 years now. Time flies. And we've done a lot, helping not all people who use cannabis for whatever reason. There's no discrimination within how we work with people. We've been doing a lot over the last year, really helping patients with prescriptions for a wide range of things, but we do also help people who can't have a prescription for whatever reason, whether the medical condition doesn't apply at the moment, or if they can't afford it, or they simply don't want it because they don't want maybe something that may have mold or radiation in it.
Ooh, sensational. No, what's the word I was looking for there? Not sensational. Salacious.
Controversial.
So somewhat, yeah, but I think recent studies are sort of proving that to be correct. I mean, the vast majority of flowers on the prescribed available via the prescribed system are still irradiated. And we've seen or self-reported from various consumers that the non-irradiated products as well have seeds and various issues. And the general kind of gist I'm hearing from the majority of consumers is that it's too dry and that the bud is quite old. As you start to break it up, you can see around sort of the stalk and the centerpiece, like the discoloration showing the amount of time that the product has been in storage. So I think there's some credence to what you're saying there. And I think it's vitally important as well, as you brought up, fucking camera, as you brought up the idea of some people that don't want prescriptions. This is something that isn't mentioned in a lot of these discussions, is that some people are quite aware of the prescription system, but they, for whatever personal reasons, ethical, moral, whatever, choose to not participate in that system, and they shouldn't face criminalization for making an informed decision, ultimately, I think.
I think another point to consider is also when you actually look at the labeling of medical products, it really just talks about CBD and THC ratios. It doesn't go into the other minor cannabinoids. It doesn't go into terpenes, flavonoids. So, some people might want to prefer to grow their own product and know exactly how it's been grown, know exactly how it's been cured, and know, that this product will have a great deal of myrcene, which might help them with insomnia, or, it's more specialized, I suppose. And, I think the industry has to catch up on those aspects.
Indeed, yeah, I think you're correct there. A lot of the people that are being cultivating their own and being self-sufficient, especially individuals self-treating medical conditions, I think, they become far more informed. And as we're hearing back from the doctors, as I have seen and reported from my own interactions with these clinicians, is they will admit that the consumer or the patient is more informed than themselves. And that is a pretty scary position to be in. And I agree, the labeling is all over the goddamn place. It's nice to see there is an internal war happening between the clinics, between some of them that have listened, and not necessarily to my position, but are starting to understand that, if we label it as medicinal, because that's what it is, rather than medical cannabis. So it's nice to see that kind of disparity happening between sort of labels. But yeah, something that you draw attention to is obviously the lack of continuity of the wording and the language and the recommendations. And yeah, as you say, the prescribing of cannabis based on the arbitrary ratio between CBD and THC is a massive oversimplification and misunderstanding of what is actually happening with the science here. So we understand that it is the synergy between the cannabinoids and the terpenes that relate to individual effects. We already know for all it is quite a poo-pooed industry in the UK, it's been, excommunicated from homeopathy. We understand how terpenes and terpenoids can have sort of impacts through aromas on the body and on your physiological systems. So we understand that there is something else happening there. And so it feels like malpractice, maybe a bit of an extreme word, but it feels very uninformed of them to be prescribing, going, that's a 20-1, that's a 20-1. And yeah, one might have a very large amount of limonene or something like that. Some people have not necessarily an allergy towards, but a susceptibility that means that they have higher anxiety or they have a negative response to it. And so they could be prescribed two different occasions, the same ratioed cannabinoids, but have two extremely different experiences. And obviously the endocannabinoid systems are as unique as fingerprints. So you and I get the same batch, we could have two very different reactions. It doesn't fit into the single symptom relief pharmaceutical model that traditional medicine is so used to, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, one of the biggest things I've been working on over the last couple of years, as you know, is driving. And where there's quite a lot to sort of unpack within this sort of area, both for people who have prescriptions and people who don't. There's a lot of discrimination. There's a lot of lack of education around it. From the people who should have the education, such as the police, the Crown Prosecution Service, the judicial system. Where would you like me to start on that?
I suppose you released a document last time you were here, or just shortly after. So I think we've kind of covered that. I'll link below, guys, episode 62 of Guy's previous appearance, where we discuss the initial creation of this document. So I suppose maybe catch us up on what modifications have been made to what sort of discoveries you've made since, and a sort of an overview of kind of the cases and people that you've been helping, maybe their outcomes. I think that'd be quite a good way to cover it.
Yeah. So the document that we published last year, which is on our website, is a little outdated now. There has been another document which isn't on the website as yet, but we sent it to the Department for Transport last year because they had a call for evidence in relation to medical cannabis and driving, and whether it caused impairment and so on.
Medicinal.
Sorry.
Sorry, I went medicinal.
yeah. Sorry, just their language, not mine.
Yeah, that's why I echo it when I use their language to show that it's like, yes, it's not me saying this.
Yeah, it's all medicinal.
yeah, baby. So sorry, I digress. Go on.
That's great. This document we sent to the Department for Transport as part of the call for evidence. We got confirmation that it was accepted by them, but we haven't heard back as yet. But the document did pretty much prove that the law is unjust. It's illegal. It breaches several human rights laws, and it's just not fit for purpose. So that was last year. So since then, we've been supporting quite a lot of cases, a mix of people with prescriptions and without prescriptions. Up to now, people with prescriptions, we've got 100% success rate. We seem to be the only people in the country actually supporting these patients because, a lot of these patients, once they get arrested and have their bloods taken, they're sitting there panicking, waiting for a summons to court to come through. They often contact defence solicitors from around the country, and unfortunately, the defence solicitors are confused by the legislation. So they say, "Oh, it's going to cost £9,000 or £10,000 to represent you. You're likely to lose your licence and get a 12-month ban, get a criminal thing against you." So yeah, they're not much use. Also, the Crown prosecution are the same. They're confused. So delving into it in more depth, what I've realised is the crux of the situation. So what it is within the legislation, the Road Traffic Act 1988, there's 17 drugs listed. Half of those are what are classed as generally medicinal drugs. So these are general prescription drugs like morphine and benzodiazepines. Amphetamine was placed in there as well at a later date. And all of these have like very high levels that you're not allowed to exceed. So when they put amphetamine into the legislation, for instance, after they changed the legislation, they look at, if you prescribed it for, say, ADHD, you're normally looking at about 20 milligrams per litre in blood. That would be the average amount that you'd be prescribed. But they increased that fivefold. So in the legislation, you're allowed up to 100 milligrams per litre in blood, which is a huge amount of amphetamine. And that's really, I think, to protect the pharmaceutical industry, because they want people not to be fearful of driving with their medication, which makes sense. But of course, anybody taking it illicitly can have quite a bit in their system and still pass the test because they're under the limit and not get prosecuted, which, fair enough. So
it's equality under the law then, isn't it?
It is, yeah. But then you've got the other half of the drugs listed, which are classed as generally illicit drugs. So these are, MDMA, LSD, and cannabis is in there as well. And these all have per se zero tolerance levels. So for cannabis, it's 2 micrograms per litre in blood, which is a tiny, tiny amount. You could be over that just from passive smoking. Also, because cannabinoids have a lipid nature, they're like oils and they store in the fat cells, they take a long time to release. So what I'm finding is a lot of people are contacting me and saying, well, I had a spliff the night before, to help me with my sleep, to help me with my insomnia. The next day I get pulled and I'm over the limit. And if you have it regularly, you're going to be over the limit all the time. So every medical cannabis patient who's prescribed will guaranteed be over that limit at all times. Luckily for them, they have a medical defence, a statutory medical defence in law. So what that means is Section 5A of the Act, which is the main one used, is the new one, is if you exceed a specified level in your blood, then you're open to prosecution, unless you're prescribed it for medical or dental reasons, and then you're allowed to exceed the limit. And this is where the confusion is. Over the last 5 years, or 7 or 8 years, the police are constantly just going through the evidential process of doing a swab. It comes up with THC. Then they arrest them, take them to the police station, do a blood test, wait for the results. If it's over the limit, it goes to a criminal case and is likely to end in a prosecution. But they're missing the point that if you have a prescription, and most police don't even know that prescriptions actually exist, that they have a medical defence. Now, what I found really interesting is there's forms that the police have to fill in as part of their PACE, which is their procedural their obligations. And when you go to an intox room, which is the room where you'll have a health practitioner who will draw blood, they have to fill in a form. It's called MGDDB form. Forget the acronym of it, but what it is basically is it's a form and checking that they're following procedure so that they can use it as evidence in a court. But there's actually little guidance notes in relation to PACE. And what it says is if somebody is in the other category of the per se zero tolerance group, and they have a valid prescription, then you shouldn't be exploring a Section 5A offence. Mm-hmm. They've got no right really to ask for a swab because they're prescribed it, and all you're doing is trying to identify a preliminary test to see if they have an illicit substance in the system. If they've already shown a prescription, then they're allowed to have that, so there's no need to do a swab. It's pointless. And then they take them to the police station under arrest, and they do a blood test. Now, they don't have to do a blood test because if they're prescribed, then they have that medical defence. What the police are supposed to do is investigate that prescription is real, that they do have a medical defence, that they're following the practitioner's guidance and the manufacturer's guidance. If they're doing all of them, they're doing nothing wrong. The only route for the police then is to go under the old Section 4 offence, and that's related to impairment and by being unfit to drive. So in that case, what they have to do is a field impairment test or sobriety test, which is getting people to walk in a straight line, touch your nose, things like that. The police very rarely use that because most police aren't actually qualified in it anymore because they've made it so easy that all they rely on is
it was 2005, I believe, wasn't it, when Section 5A was made the preference?
2015 it changed, yeah.
2015, yeah. I missed that one in my head. So yeah, exactly. Since then, there's been, as you say, no reason to it because it's become so procedural that detection then leads to X, Y, Z. It's interesting because they do follow procedure. If you say are pulled over, suspected of either being under the influence of alcohol or any other substance, they swab you, they find, or they breathalyze you and they find presence of it, and they take you back to the police station for bloods. If you state at that point that you have sort of a needle phobia or some sort of medical condition that means that you cannot give that blood, that gives you, again, a medical defense as to why then you cannot be sort of dealt with under that charge. So at that point, they have to leave you, go away and search your health records so they can get access to your summary care record to see if you've got this on your file. They can do exactly the same thing for cannabis. Like, they should be doing exactly the same thing for cannabis. It's the same procedure. Ring the same thing or type into the same thing, and they get access to it, and they can clearly state on summary of care records that you are actively prescribed. And then that should be the first indication of, well, oh shit, as you say, and they should then seek to go to, if they even choose to, Section 4 of the Act, which is, as you said, doing a field sobriety test to check. But obviously, by the time they've fucked around, there's so much time elapsed from the point that it becomes, not admissible in court. So they're really fucking themselves here. And it is already, the guidance is there. It is, as you say, they're just not doing their due diligence and actually going, well, wait a minute, this person is saying they have a defense. It's then the emphasis on the officer to check if that's a valid defense, because any action thereafter could be seen as, what is it they call it in law, the fruit of the poisonous tree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, because this is in the guidance in the form, they're so used to filling these forms in, they don't look at the guidance. So they're not really aware of that defense. And because they're not aware that medical cannabis clinic prescriptions, are a thing, they just dismiss it and go, oh, it's just somebody trying it on. They ignore it. That means that it's an unlawful arrest and it's false imprisonment, which is a criminal offence. So that means, the police can actually be prosecuted for that. So it's a really weird one, and you find this isn't only the police that are lacking in education on this; it's defence solicitors. So if you're in custody and you have a right to legal representation, they'll normally put you in touch with a duty solicitor. Now, I'm often finding that the duty solicitors are saying to them, "Oh no, you don't have a defence. If you're over the limit, then you're going to be prosecuted." Now, that's professional negligence on their part, and this is happening everywhere. And so it's not just the police; it's the defence solicitors. Also, the Crown Prosecution Service don't seem to know. So
I was going to say that's a point, because for people that are not sort of aware, the way that it kind of works in this country is you're accused of a crime, suspected of one. Police grab you, pick you up, they conduct certain evidence, they compile it, they then put the best case together based on two principles. One is on the principle of what is best and most likely to result in a prosecution. That data pack is then sent to the CPS. The CPS then run it through two protocols. And is this in the public interest? And is this prosecutable? Like, just statistically, percentage wise, is it likely to result in prosecution? So yeah, during that point, the police are then gathering that information, but then when they're handing that to the CPS is supposed to know what is prosecutable and the fucking law. So the fact that they don't immediately throw it back in their face is very telling.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. You're going to be waiting 3 to 6 months on average for a blood test to come through after being analysed to actually show a result. Now, if that patient has shown evidence that they've got a medical defence, it shouldn't even go to there. It should be what's called NFA, which is no further action, before it even goes to a charge. It should be thrown out. But they're not doing that because they're so used to trying to go for a prosecution. And then once the CPS get a hold of it, they'll try and find anything they can. They're like a bitch on heat, just trying to find a prosecution. So what we're finding is that although they've got the medical defence to exceed the limit, they're looking at the guidance from the practitioner and the manufacturer, and this is where there's issues. So recently, I'm working with somebody who their practitioner, a pain specialist in a medical cannabis clinic. I'm not going to say which one. Instead of saying which is the official guidance, which is do not drive if you feel impaired, he said to the patient, well, he actually wrote a letter to the police saying, I told him not to exceed the limit. Now, that's a real mistake, because what he's saying is, I've advised my patient not to exceed the statutory limit. Now, every patient will guaranteed exceed that limit at all times. He's a specialist in pain. He's not a specialist in the Road Traffic Act. Mm-hmm. So he shouldn't be able to determine what the level is, or how people shouldn't. He's doing the same as alcohol. He's kind of, well, if you've exceeded the limit, you're impaired. And there's actually no correlation between the level in blood and impairment, which we can come to in a bit. So that's professional negligence from the clinics. But then you've also got professional negligence from the pharmacies as well, because what you're finding is that there's not standardization across the board on the labeling. So there's a case I'm working with at the minute, and if your prescription comes from Australia, for instance, where it's illegal to drive on it, on the actual labeling, it will say do not drive rather than do not drive if impaired. So once you collect all your evidence ready for court, and if you've got a prescription medication that says do not drive, then you're going to get the prosecution based on that, because you're not following the manufacturer's guidance, even though the general standardization of guidance in the UK is do not drive if impaired. So until we get that standardization across the board, they're putting patients at risk. And this is the same with practitioners. Yeah, and it's one of those quirky little things about this whole medicinal cannabis industrial complex that really kind of bothers me. It's these recommendations. We are not given definitive guidelines. We are not, this is allowed, this isn't. And it's bollocks. So I think on my most recent script, it said avoid alcohol, which is stupid language. Like, what do you mean avoid it? So you're telling me I can't, I shouldn't? Like, it's not enough. Same with the whole vaporization thing. The law says that the smoking of cannabis, when prescribed under Schedule 2 of the Misuse of Drugs Regulations 2001, is prohibited. Yeah, the guidance you get from your doctor is they recommend vaporization. I've been back and forth with at least 3 of the prescribing clinicians as to what the fuck this means. And they keep saying without fail, it's a recommendation. We recommend it. And I keep rebutting, well, you recommend to obese people, they do exercise. You recommend to depressed people, they go outside and walk in nature. Do you kick down their doors and lock them in prison cells if they don't go outside or don't commit to losing weight? No, it's a recommendation. I should be able to take it as an advisement. And if it was then a definitive, you have to, I think, so this is where I think the judiciary is at least one side of hope, because for all that's very corrupted in this country, they have to, or are supposed to, and allegedly are held to account to, equality under the law.
and to really understand the nuance of these legislations and how they stack together. And so I think the manufacturer's advice for in some cases would end up in prosecution. I think if that was counter to the physicians or the prescribing doctor's advice, that would cause a contradiction and probably an issue within the morality and the potential ethics, even if we ascribe such things to judges within them, to kind of go, well, shit, what do we do here? And so I think it's down again. It's that postcode lottery that we've been facing with cannabis-related offences in this country for a decade. Of if you're the right person in the right place and you get a bit of sympathy because of your background, or if you've got your promising life in front of you and the judge doesn't want to ruin it, they're likely to not remove your license. But if you happen to be from the wrong class, the wrong group, speak or dress in the wrong way, that's going to be prejudicial against you. And this is what we mean about needing equality under the law. Yeah. And I think you're really hitting onto some important points here. And I know obviously that you have been, can we discuss this? I don't know if we should, with the CIC, that I believe under the impression that you may be working with some of their, one of their groups around sort of regulations and compliance.
Well, I can explain that if you like. Yeah, so I was invited to do a bit of consultation with the substandards group at the CIC on a paper regarding driving, because it's obviously an issue that's coming up regularly amongst the clinics. In fact, quite a few of the clinics now actually refer their patients directly to me to help them because nobody else seems to understand the law. So we have had some really good conversations. We've had some really good ideas. So we are working together now on actually solving these issues. So we're looking at the standardization for labeling, making sure that's right. Professor Mike Barnes has asked me to develop a paper for the MCCS, which is the Medical Cannabis Clinician Society, so that can be disseminated to all of the prescribers to basically give them the correct guidance on how to deal with patients in regard to driving. So these things are now starting to move in the right direction to create that standardization. Also, one thing that's come up quite a lot is, when you get stopped by the police, you often have your prescription on your phone. Now, a lot of people who are patients with a prescription have often been using it illicitly for several years, and they don't want to have to pass their phone to the police because the police he sees it off them. So what I've suggested is that all the clinics, what they should do is provide a paper-based evidence document. So basically a document from the clinic confirming that this person has a legal prescription, confirming that they follow the practitioner's guidance is do not drive if impaired, confirming that the manufacturer's guidance is do not drive if impaired, and then they've got all that together. Now, CDAF Future, just before Christmas, we published a new document in regards to a police notice. So basically, it's something you can pass to the police if you get pulled over, basically explaining the law, explaining the medical defence, and explaining what the PACE procedures are of the police. So if you've got the evidence that you're following all the guidance, and unless they have evidence that you're impaired, then they should drop it there and then, not even go to a swab and just let you go on your way, like they would do with any other prescription medication, such as opioids or benzodiazepines, which incidentally are much more impairing than cannabis is.
So I think it's important to hash out some of the procedures in terms of the individual when they're pulled over here, in terms of knowing their defence and their statutory rights. So there are some circumstances. So say if you were pulled over and the police suspected you of polydrug use, so you were under the influence of multiple substances, obviously they've got to state in their accusation of you, when they basically come to you and say that we believe or suspect that you are XYZ, they have to then state within those grounds the substances that they believe that you are under the influence. They cannot, as far as I'm aware, under the law, just generally go, we think you're on something, let's fucking test it. That's why when they'll come to the car, they'll go, I smell cannabis, and it'll trigger the cannabis response. Or they'll smell alcohol on you, or they'll look at your eyes and go, we think there's maybe prescription medications, like too much of, etc., as you were saying. And then they will go down that section 4, looking at impairment and asking them the questions to affirm what the situation is. So as long as that doesn't occur, if they come to you with a single accusation, a suspicion of you under the influence of cannabis, and you have that lawful defence in that you have an active prescription that you are following the guidance of, you can refuse the swab. You can refuse bloods. You can, I mean, you're not allowed, they're depending on the officer and their level of informed nature, you can obviously resist arrest. That is in and of itself a charge. So you do have to then kind of go along with that. Do not obviously start swearing, become belligerent. Again, that is an antisocial behavior. They can do that if you physically touch them or anything like that. Again, guys, you can get in trouble for assaulting an officer, and you wouldn't believe that just literally putting your hand on an officer can be interpreted as assault. And I have seen friends have to defend this in court. So
you could get up to a year in prison for assaulting an emergency worker.
Yeah, so be very mindful of this. Be polite. Remind them of your statutory rights. Ask them to seek and follow PACE guidance. They will have procedure. If the officers that detain you, obviously most beat bobbies are not very well informed or educated. They're lackeys, for lack of a better word. Once you get to the desk sergeant, they're a bit more higher up. You can obviously request to speak to I don't know what they call them. Is it duty sergeant or something like that?
Yeah, the custody sergeant.
Yeah, there's then running the shift, and you can just basically at each opportunity repeat your statutory rights. Like I said, be polite, but you do not have to submit to these invasive interventions. You do not have to. So you have that right. If you choose to do so, remember that you will have a defense in court later on. If you are interviewed under caution, obviously remember what the fucking police tell you is anything you later rely on in court. Do mention, so reiterate again, you have a lawful medical defense because you have an active exemption and license in a prescription, in the form of a prescription. And just be patient. And as I think we could maybe move on to discussing now.
Can I just go back and just qualify some of those statements a little bit? Because now when I was doing my research, I have discovered new defences in law, which are basically what you described there. So when they're looking for exceeded limits, it's a Section 5A offence. Within the Road Traffic Act, there's also Section 6 and Section 7 of the Act. So Section 6 is refusing a preliminary test. So if you refuse a swab, which will show up for THC or cocaine, although there is a new one coming out in Northern Ireland at the moment, which identifies a number of drugs, but that hasn't come out into England and Wales yet. To refuse that isn't a criminal offence unless you have a reasonable excuse. So if you have a prescription, you have a reasonable excuse to refuse that, although that hasn't actually been tested in the courts yet. Like, this is something that CEDAR Future have identified, and legally it must work because there isn't any reason, if you've already informed the officer that you use cannabis on a daily basis, you do it legally because you've got a prescription.
Sorry, I'm just going to clarify, lawfully, not legally there.
Yeah. So you have a right to refuse that. You've got a reasonable excuse because all they're going to do is identify whether you've got cannabis in your system, which they already know because you've already informed them. Yeah. So it's a waste of taxpayers' money in having to throw that thing away. As for blood tests, now a lot of people refuse a blood test. And that's a Section 7 offence, and it has the same repercussions as exceeding the limit. So if you refuse a blood test, you can get a 12-month ban, criminal record, up to 6 months in prison, and a fine. So
disqualification of licence as well, isn't it?
Yeah, for a 12-month ban. Yeah. So you've got to be really careful and decide which way you want to go down the route. So if you've got a medical prescription, if you're happy to take a blood test and a swab, it's actually probably easier to just go along with it if they're going to be difficult and go through that. But of course, taking blood is a very invasive procedure. It could be classed as assault. It causes a bruise. You're basically putting a sharp instrument into your arm. So there is an option that you can refuse that. So as you said before, even if you haven't got a prescription, you can refuse a blood test if you've got a medical reasonable excuse. So that's often something like a needle phobia or extreme anxiety about needles or something, or drawing blood. So, if it's going to cause you a panic attack and make you really anxious, you can refuse that. And if you can demonstrate that in a court that you have something in your medical notes that shows that you've got a needle phobia or anxiety or maybe an autistic spectrum disorder, then that can qualify and get you off it. but you're still going to have to go through the court process. Where with a medical cannabis prescription, now, they can't, if you've already shown evidence that you're fitting all the criteria for your medical defence, there's no reason for them to even go down the route of trying to prove a Section 5A offence. Mm-hmm. They can only go down Section 4, which is impairment. So they should have already done a field impairment test to see if you're impaired in any way, and they should record that on their body cam. Mm-hmm. Now, when you go to the intox room and they want to take a blood test, you can refuse that on the grounds that it's an invasive procedure, and that if they're looking for a Section 4 offence, the level of THC in blood or any other bodily fluid is irrelevant. You know, if they've got evidence of impairment and they can demonstrate that you've got some THC, so that can be below the level or above the level through either blood or urine, then that's acceptable. So what you can do is opt for the least invasive procedure of a urine sample, and they should do that, and that's actually in their forms. This is all in the document on the CDR Future website, which everyone is free to download. And I would recommend, if you have a prescription, you download that, keep it in your vehicle with a paper copy, if you prefer, of your prescription and a picture of your patient. Just make sure it says "do not drive if impaired" or something similar. If it says "do not drive, contact me." So that basically backs you up, and it should hopefully stop you even getting arrested in the first instance. But that's your medical defences and your reasonable excuse defences as per Section 6 and 7, which is to do with the tests. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I thought I had to elaborate on.
No, thank you for doing so. No, I think a very, very good point. Hopefully that will inform people of kind of their rights a bit more and what to do sort of procedurally. Pronounce that word, if they find themselves in this circumstance. And yeah, as you say, there's so many of the police themselves just don't know. No. They do not know that there is a lawful defence, and this is the problem that I'm having. I'm working on a white paper for a couple of different groups. I'm not going to reveal the second one, but CIC is the first place that it's going to go. And basically, it's trying to understand sort of this binary argument of decriminalization and legalization, and really, it's got to a point where the language is so wrong and misrepresentative of what is actually happening in terms of the legislation and its impact on individuals. And the police themselves are in this artificial binary. Cannabis is illegal, which it's not. Cannabis cannot be illegal. It's never been illegal, never will be illegal anywhere, because it's a neutral object. Objects are not criminalized. They have no nature. They have no ability for culpability. They cannot be prosecuted, put in handcuffs, locked in a cage. So what societies do and the law seeks to do is to criminalize certain activities with these objects in a spectrum of lawful nature. So legal is typically binary. Something is either legal or illegal. If something is illegal, but there is legal means in which it can be performed, then it falls out of that categorization and into lawful, unlawful, which is then it's a spectrum of it. And then so the lawful nature of it, in terms of when we reference drugs, or predominantly, especially in this situation, cannabis, is that it is unlawful to possess, cultivate, or produce. Obviously, there's a difference between cultivation and production dependent on POCA, the Proceeds of Crime Act. Trade, distribute, or sell cannabis without exemption, without license, or without authorization from the British government. So therefore, when even the cops are stopping, it's illegal. There is no such thing as legal medical cannabis. Even that sentence as well falls down. Medical, in the same way that legal denotes things pertaining to the law, medical denotes things pertaining to medicine. So in the sentence of, say, like a medical prescription is accurate because the prescription is a medical apparatus. So it belongs in the realm of medical. Whereas then cannabis is medicinal because it's the object can then be used for medicinal benefit and value. And so you can see what at every level, the language is so fucked that we can't even begin to have these rational conversations with these institutions and authorities, because they themselves are not the nature of the authority plus the workers inside of it that you deal with are so misguided and confused by what is going on with cannabis. And so when we hear it said as, oh, it's illegal this, or it's illegal that, or we should legalize this, it's like, all of these things miss the subject matter. Cannabis is legal, always has been. It is unlawful for individuals without exemption, license, or authorization to cultivate, possess, trade, sell, etc. that we said before. And so that's the thing that we really, I think, you need to hark down onto this, is the hypocrisy that then creates in law, that if there is the defense for those with the magic piece of paper, why is it all of a sudden that they shouldn't be tried under Section 5 and they should fall under Section 4? As you spoke of before, the high levels of benzodiazepine, of diamorphine, of amphetamines and various other prescribed but also binary illicit drugs, as in their lawful under prescription but unlawful without, so become illicit drugs, that those levels are so high because of the equality under the law. If then now cannabis can be prescribed is a medicinal, as a medicine, then ultimately those levels have to reflect that. So as you said, that the support for the prescribed patients within this space is support for all cannabis consumption when driving. It's not to say that we're going to get rid of it all, but at the minute they're not stopping people with prescriptions and running them through Section 4, so they're not actually seeking impairment at all. So the police are not looking for people, the right-wing media will be like, these potted up drivers. It's this weird thing that actually, as you said, there is no association between impairment and detection. And the wonderful thing of the medical defense with prescriptions is that the doctor can't tell you you're impaired. The authorities can give you an impairment test and deem you to be impaired via their standards and be prosecuted for it. But unless you're, uninformed enough, naive enough to maybe say one of the following words when pulled over: sleepy, tired, drowsy, impaired, out of it, anything that denotes towards not having your cognitive capacity in that moment, that's then you in an admission that you are impaired by your medication. But other than that field sobriety test, you cannot be found to be impaired. So again, it's just trying to get, as you say, that information and education out there. But it's so difficult because even as we are in this conversation, we're tripping over language that creates false binaries or artificial representations of arguments that aren't there. And I think that's where a lot of the bickering and infighting is occurring across the spectrum of the space, in that no one is really protected. It's just that they have a lawful defense. And actually, if we truly understood the law, there's a way to force a review of it.
Yeah, well, this is exactly what Seed Our Future are planning to do. I mean, when I talk about cannabis and driving, a lot of what comes up in community groups is, oh, well, you shouldn't be driving if you're on cannabis, you're danger, whatever kid runs out in the road in front of you and everything. You've got about a quarter of the driving population on opioids, benzodiazepines, Z drugs like sleep drugs, things like that, which are far more impairing than cannabis. You have a legal civil right in law to drink and drive up to a level. So you're allowed to go up to 36 micrograms per 100 ml of blood, which is on average about 2 pints of beer. So you're allowed to, you have a civil right to, go for lunch, sit and have some lunch, have a pint or two and drive. But if you actually look at the Druid report, which was the big European report years ago, and you look at the levels of impairment in relation to cannabis and other substances, cannabis is far below the legal allowable level as far as impairment goes. And recent research that's come out has actually shown that within impairment, you've got, psychomotor skills. They're the main things. And you find that a lot with alcohol, it impairs your psychomotor skills. It doesn't with cannabis. This is why, if you see somebody drunk in the street, they're falling around, falling off their chair, slurring their speech. You don't get that with cannabis. You're still able to walk around and function. There's also your cognitive ability. That's not impaired to a great degree with cannabis compared to alcohol. So it's really more your mental perception of things. So if anything, you might forget where you're going or what you're going for when you're going shopping, or you might, get lost or take the scenic route. It's much more likely that it's far less impairing than most things. So, although there is a risk of impairment, of course there is, and everybody's different, and a lot of it's to do with tolerance. So a lot of these studies, when they've done studies with people on a simulated driving thing, a lot of these people that they use are people who've never taken cannabis before. They give them a big joint, sit them in front of this screen, and of course they're impaired. But people who have used cannabis for a period of time, they've got that tolerance and it's much less effect. So they're actually perfectly fine to drive. I think people instinctively know who use cannabis whether you should get behind the wheel or not. If you're really stoned, you don't even want to get off the sofa, never mind get behind the wheel. And it's the same with as you said, with people with prescriptions. It's up to the individual to decide whether they're impaired or not. And if you're impaired for any reason, whether it's tiredness or flu or smoking cannabis or whatever, then you shouldn't be getting behind the wheel and you should have the book thrown at you. But for people who are responsible, and this is the key word, as in the new legislation within Malta, it's responsible adult use. If you're responsible, so these people who have used it for insomnia the night before, they're driving the next day, there's no way in hell that they're impaired in any way, but they're still going to get prosecuted and lose their license, lose their job, lose their family potentially. And, that's not right. It's discrimination.
Well, yeah, I mean, considering I basically have the lawful right to set up a fucking volcano in my car, put in a plug adapter into the cigarette lighter and sit there and chuff bags all day long. Yeah. I have that lawful right. It is not then deemed an impairing act or anything like it's the hypocrisy of this. And as you said, the responsible use, I think, is something that is missed by this. And it's one of the reasons why I'm trying personally to seek the decriminalization and depenalization of cannabis-related individual offences before we even look at multinational corporate legalization, so-called legalization was big L, because you can't small L cannabis, you can't legalize cannabis because, as we discussed, it's already fucking legal. All you can do is use the law to create new legislation, restrictions, and criminal offences to govern the commercial sale and licensing of cannabis. As we look at Canada, it went from 5 laws to 47 laws, I believe, which again is not what legalized small L. Pete Tosh was singing about when he was singing legalize. He wasn't legalize it for corporations around the world and the fucking a cabal of rich white capitalists. That is not what they meant when they said legalize. And it's not what most people mean when they say legalize small L. But the corporates and the politicians and these venture groups and people like BlackRock and that, they're promoting big L legalization, as in proper noun describing of an action within society rather than the action of making something previously illegal legal. Because again, we can't do that because cannabis is already legal. It's just that it's unlawful for you sitting at home, buddy boy, to possess it, to cultivate it, to fucking trade it and profit from it. Yet there's 60 million being floated on the London Stock Exchange.
Yeah, but the big dichotomy here is actually the scheduling. So you mentioned before the Misuse of Drugs Regulations 2001. On the 1st of November 2018, it was changed to Schedule 2 for CBPMs, which are prescribed. Yeah. So if you have a prescription, then it's a Schedule 2 drug, and it's flour. It's like it's flour that you vape, yeah.
Yeah.
But it still remains as Schedule 1 if you don't have a prescription, even though it's still flour.
Yeah.
So how can the same substance be in 2 different schedules at the same time? Remembering that Schedule 1 means it's harmful, highly prone to abuse, and has no medical or very little therapeutic value. So they're basically saying that cannabis that's bought on the street or home cultivated is potentially dangerous and is different to what you're getting from a pharmacy. It's not. The technology, the equipment you can use to standardize that cultivation and using clones so they're all genetically similar, you can produce as good, if not better quality. And I think that's what a lot of the industry, the community is saying now, that actually, the quality is different. So, it's that difference between Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. So the thing is, there's actually no legal way that cannabis can remain as a Schedule 1 drug.
It can though, so that it's all part of a little legalese trick. And it started with the 2001 regulations, which were actually passed. Huge, allegedly, fucking sue me, I've got nothing, I'll see you in court. was allegedly passed basically for one statement and for one action, and that was to allow for the authorization of licensing, research and production of cannabis-based medications for GW Pharmaceuticals here in the UK. Because prior to that, the law says under the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971 that a Schedule 1 drug cannot be a medical substance. It cannot. So cocaine in this country is a Class A Schedule 2 drug, for example, because it has medicinal benefit and value. The UK is actually one of the world's largest importers of air quotes medicinal cocaine. That's a rabbit hole to go dive down, folks. Go make sure you're in a private browser and go figure that one out. But yeah, so it's, as you said, it's this contradiction. So what they managed to do is use this regulation to then go, no. Cannabis that isn't cultivated or produced to a certain standard or within regulations defined by us is then, it's naturally dangerous. What makes it a medicine is the GMP, the good manufacturing practice, which actually, when you look at it, folks, is a very large con. So they just import cannabis from anywhere in the fucking world. It lands in a building. It then goes through GMP, which is good manufacturing practices. And basically, it's their packaging rules. That's fucking it. It's not been grown specially. It's been grown to the specifications of Israel, fucking Dominican Republic, fucking Australia, Canada, fucking Zimbabwe rules and regulations. And it's how it's then packaged. That's the lie. That's what makes it medicine, is because it's the special packaging and the special permission from the doctors. And so that's the contradiction of it, is they're taking what is accepted, air quotes, accepted by the establishment as a dangerous drug, and in limited capacity, or one could say through exemption, authorization, and license, turning it into a prescribable medication. So it's that trick that they've done, and they get to reiterate that when they say cannabis. This is why, again, I am fighting against the term medical cannabis, capital M, capital C, because that's a proper noun that then means CBPM, which is a cannabis-based medicinal product designed for human consumption. That is then regulated under MHR regulations in the fucking 2001 Act, as we said before. So they do all this legalese bullshit, but actually when you get into what it says in the 2001 Act, it says that a Schedule 2 CBMP is and/or a preparation of cannabis. So it's stating in their own legislation that CBPM Schedule 2 cannabis is just cannabis, which is in Schedule 1 cannabis. So the reason we are being prosecuted is not because of the lack of medicinal value or acceptance or any of that shit. It's because we don't individually have the exemption, the authority, or the license to get away with the actions related to cannabis. And I think that's where the focus needs to be for the entire movement in the UK, is to win back those actions. Fuck having to pay tax and be licensed and regulated by the corporate system in the same machine that has, demonized us for decades, vilified us and raided us and called us fucking druggies and gaslit us in every medical setting. We should have that initial freedom and liberty. Then we can have this conversation about fucking high streets and whatever else. Because, as I said, we've seen under decriminalization, depenalization models, the coffee shops in Holland, the clubs in Spain, the compassion networks under Prop 215 in California. These were all on depenalization, decriminalization models. And they were, when you speak to the legacy people around the world, the best that they've seen. Because when legalization gets involved, the community, the culture gets lost. It's gentrified, it's whitewashed, it's about fucking venture capital, it's about quarterly returns and fucking shareholder interest rather than the actual liberation of the individual consumers of cannabis.
Well, there is actually two key elements which could change this and actually create a decriminalized or depenalized model. And that is, the two factors are, firstly, that cannabis has to be considered medical, but not just that, but also essential, because everybody's got an endocannabinoid system.
That's a medicinal, not medical in that instance. But I agree with the sentiment, just not the language.
So because it affects our endocannabinoid system and basically regulates the same as our endocannabinoids that we produce naturally, then it can prevent and treat virtually all diseases. So it's got to be classed as essential. Within UN legislation, when they look at essential medicines, which have to be available by the state to people who need it, they're normally looking at morphine and methadone, things like that, for pain. Now, we know now with the scientific research that cannabis outcompetes these opioid-based painkillers without the side effects, without the addiction, without the risk of death. And, it actually helps get people off these alternative medications. So it has to be classed as essential. If we can accept that cannabis is essential and all use of it can be medicinal, even the recreational use. So you might be using it for social anxiety, to go out with your friends and communicate, and it helps you relax if you've got an anxiety disorder. So that recreational use could be considered medicinal, because you can get benzodiazepines and things to do the same thing. Yeah. So if all use has to be medicinal because it reacts to our endocannabinoid system, whether we want it to or not, then we have a right to access an essential medicine across the board. And the state is liable to make sure that that provision is there. Now, since 2018, when the law changed, it's only been available via private prescription, not on the NHS. In fact, the NHS register set up in 2021 hasn't got any patients registered on it.
Just to clarify that, there's no flower products or oil products have been prescribed yet. There is nearly 12,000. There's been 12,000 licensed prescriptions for Sativex, Epidiolex, and is it Dronabinol? I think it is.
Yeah. Okay, so then you need to go into the argument of the entourage effect, because these are either synthetic or they're isolates, and they don't have the full benefit of the plant. So only really a full spectrum oil extract or flower is actually applicable as an essential medicine, because that would be on the endocannabinoid system.
And this is where you fall into a bit of a problem that the pharmaceutical industry are having, in that in order to make it a medical product, it can be a cannabis botanical extract, but then it has to be into some sort of pharmaceutical product. Once it's then, the process can, I suppose, in some ways make it, which is what they're trying to figure out, but it's the delivery systems that are a way of then getting around this, so they can patent that, and then that's their intellectual property. But so because of the way that any flower could be prescribed through the clinics and provided with the oils as well, oil as well through tinctures. Granted, a lot of them are very, very watered down. You're not getting actual full fecal that you could sort of produce quite easily at home, sort of thing. And I think it's the pharmaceutical sector. They are only wanting these CBPMs, these cannabis-based. That's the important thing, they're cannabis-based. So they're based on cannabis. So that language allows them to produce fully synthetics, so they can use fucking SCRAs, fucking synthetic cannabinoid receptor antagonists, any multitude of them that they can make. Yeah. So that can then be classified as this, and then doesn't need to be, but they can't make a full botanical extract without then doing something else or adding something else to it that then makes it a CBPM. And I think that's the issue that the industry is having right now, is it's just basically a cash cow of the clinics prescribing as much flower and whatever products they can until the system catches up and goes, wait, if then cannabis is a medicine under these current regulations, it cannot be in its floral form. It has to be in a preparation form.
Right. Yeah, but this is the age-old argument, isn't it, of, like what is a medicinal product? And you look at the pharmaceutical industry, it's all isolates or synthetics mixed together into a commercial product, which can be patented. Now, this has always been the issue. This is why cannabis has always been unavailable as a medicine for at least like the last 50 to 100 years, because it can't be patented, because you've got 500 compounds all working synergistically together. So if people consider that an essential medicine and it's not available because the NHS won't allow it, and the only way to get it is if you've got the money to get it, or you've got a condition that will allow you to get it, then that's discrimination, and it's a breach of your human right to health and autonomy. Now, the UN have basically said this, that any state who can't provide an essential medicine to the populace has to either decriminalize or depenalize that, so that it can be used for personal use, possession, and cultivation. So that's the argument that could be used in the future to actually change the law under a human rights argument.
Yeah, it's a good argument. It's a very good stance. My fear would be the interpretation of the opposition would then go, oh, it's a medicine, is it? Yeah, you're right. You're not allowed it. In the same way, opium, right, used to just be available. Used to just fucking grow. People traded it. It was available. Then the birth of the hypodermic needle, In like the mid 1800s, the discovery of making it water soluble, etc., and other preparations led to the creation of heroin. Heroin then became a brand product released by Bayer, was then openly sold and available. This then led into eventually, obviously, we've got like fentanyl and carfentanil now, and it took what was quite a benign thing, the act of smoking opium. You read these sensationalist stories written 200 fucking years ago about opium dens and whatever through the lens of modern prohibition, and you understand that actually maybe it's not this hellscape they were painting it is. They just disliked these behaviors, these actions, associations, and culture of these people that chose to consume something that they didn't. Do you know what I mean? And so it went from them being a cultural thing of you could just use opium to now then think of the demonization of people that are accessing opium. Do you know what I mean? You're either, and again, it's that false binary. You're either a dirty, homeless, street addict, dangerous criminal, or you're a prescribed patient. And my worry is that they're trying over a longer period now to do the opium and take it from the people, and then going, okay, yeah, it is a medicine, but only in these specific circumstances when we give it, because it's too powerful of a disruptor is cannabis, that if we actually gave it to the people as a drug for themselves, it disrupts so many other industries. Do you know what I mean? The technological capacity of cannabis, if it is then cultivated en masse, there's your carbon sequestration. So there's your carbon tax economy gone, and all of that fucking idea. Petrochemical fertilizers gone. Fucking petroleum-based fucking fuel's gone, lithium battery capacity, supercapacitors and that gone, textiles and everything else with cotton production. You know what I mean? It's such a disruptive force else that if they actually give it to us without them, and so I feel that they're going to go, all right, it's a medicine now and you've got it. And this is why they've got CBD, and they've slowly gone the long way of trying to make that a medicine as well. And they're just trying to pull the parts out of it and leave it so it's just a bunch of dirty druggies in a field going, we deserve to get high. And they'll have taken every optic and every approach away from us. Do you know what I mean? And this is what I fear is their response is then, well, yeah, it's always medicine. So that's why I really try and refrain from it, because some people
it's also spiritual. There's lots of different areas and lots of different human rights acts that can also support that. But the point is that in the law, it's supposed to be available if it's essential to you. If you believe that you need this for whatever reason, then you should have access to it. And if the state can't provide access to it, then you have a right to be able to produce it yourself. And then you should be able to share it through a club model. So for people who maybe have a disability where they're not able to cultivate their own medicine, then they should be able to access it through a community group, such as the club model.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's some points to consider, I think.
As you say,
this can also be replicated as well in the driving legislation. Although there's no need to decriminalize cannabis and driving per se, but what we need is the law to be in line with Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which is the right to a fair and impartial trial. So because they rely entirely on a blood test, which has no correlation to impairment, and we now know that, and there's plenty of global evidence to support that, and the fact that it doesn't impair as much as most things, then what we need to do is get cannabis removed entirely from Section 5A of the Act for both people with prescriptions and without, and have it where it stood originally, where it was in Section 4. And that would create a level playing field across for everyone. So basically, the police would have to prove impairment to be able to secure a conviction. So that would make a level playing field for everyone, and that's what we're pushing for. And I think we could do that through a high court judgment or judicial review, looking at it from a human rights perspective, but also the evidence to back it up. There's no evidence that we can find that it causes fatalities on the roads, or hasn't done since the change in legislation in 2015. It isn't a risk to the public. It isn't a risk to people's own themselves, and there's no evidence to show that the blood level has any correlation to impairment. So it's not a just legislation. It needs to be changed, and I think that can happen in quite a short period of time, and it's something we're working on. But again, it's all to do with money, isn't it? So see our future. I mean, I all the people I support with court cases, I don't charge them. I work full time supporting patients and people without prescriptions all the time, and for their court cases, for complaints against different organisations. And we do that because we love the plant and we love the community, and we want to respect and help people with their rights. So we don't ask for anything for that. But, you know, if we're going to look at something like a high court judgment or a judicial review, we need some funding for that. So, you know, anybody out there who's maybe been affected by this sort of thing, or is worried about being affected by this sort of thing, and maybe would need our help at some point in the future, you know, think about that. And maybe, you know, if you do have a little bit of surplus money running around, you know, and you want to give a donation to Seed Our Future, it will really help us to be able to carry on doing what we're doing, because it's getting more and more chaotic. We're getting more and more cases. I mean, I've got 10 to 15 cases at the minute I'm running on. And, you know, only so much time in the day. So, yeah, like, you know, we need to do something bigger, like a judicial review, which we can, you know, get all in one go. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's entirely that. It's that it needs to be evidence and not ideological. And we're at a point now where the evidence far outweighs the antiquated ideology surrounding this. You raise a very valid point around the approach of this. It's something I'm, again, trying to get people to understand around this artificial binary debate of legalization, decriminalization, is that there are already a myriad of laws and legislation in place that regulate human behavior. So my ideal stance, obviously, if I woke up tomorrow and I was Prime Minister, first of all, I wonder how the fuck I got there. But what I'd be looking to do is
an improvement.
I reckon I could do any better than that. I mean, fuck yeah. But yeah, if that was the case, if I woke up tomorrow with that power and that ability, and I could just go to Parliament and go, well, this is the fucking crack and this is what we're doing, I would deschedule cannabis as a plant from current legislation, so that until it is set on fire and consumed as a drug, it is dealt with as a plant. It is no different, in the same way that you wouldn't be arrested for your tomato plant leaves. Yet if you then boiled them down and made it into, I think it's cyanide you can make it from it, then you've done something. It's that point there's then an issue. And then if you do an action with that, that's then the problem. And I think that's where the legislation for this should begin, if it has to begin at all. So that means the cultivation, production of as much cannabis, many cannabis plants as you want at home. Yeah, the emphasis and the assumption of the law should always be that you are just going to do something benign with it. In the same way as if they see you growing a fuck ton of potatoes, they don't think you're going to go take on McCain and try and become the chip king of the world. Do you know what I mean? You're just left to your own fucking devices. That's what I'd like to see there. If then you are, you know, commercially profiting from large sales of it, then that's a tax issue. You're avoiding tax. That's got nothing to do with cannabis. You'd be dealt with under the tax law. If you were then, you know, making it into a fucking weapon and harming people, that's then assault or murder, etc. There's charges there. So in the same way with antisocial behaviors, we already have this in place. So if you're then walking through a fucking kid's playground smoking a fat joint, you can be dealt with as an antisocial behavior. It's got nothing to do with the cannabis. We need to get cannabis removed from all of this shit. It's the individual actions and behaviors of people. That is the only thing that matters here. And if we can get rid of this idea of an assumption that cannabis consumers are bad people, criminal, dangerous just for consuming cannabis, which, by the way, is not unlawful in this country. You're lawfully allowed to consume as much cannabis as you want. You just lawfully can't possess it. It's a paradox. You can be as high as you want, but you cannot lawfully get that high. And then obviously, like you say, if you get behind a vehicle or whatever else, there are then again other laws that come into effect. So the minutiae of the legal apparatus that we already exist within and operate under in this country can regulate cannabis's actions. So my idea would, be to deschedule the plant, and then would be to decriminalize and depenalize immediately that day any of the individual actions with it under the current legislations. Then open up a window of 18 months to 2 years where there is a de facto, where it would be de jure, I suppose, it would be de jure decriminalization, which means that it would sign into legislation a cessation, a pausing of all criminal convictions, all arrests and investigations into people for cannabis-only offences. Then over that period, allow clubs to flourish, coffee shops that are under non-profits, communities like interest companies and organizations that are investing that money back in, that there is obviously money being made from the sale of cannabis, but the profits are paying for salaries, are paying for the uptake to keep the building, reinvesting into the community, etc. And just study those models, create unbiased fucking boards and committees to study what is happening, actually observe the culture decriminalized for a couple of years, see what it actually looks like, what it actually wants, then create a committee from the best of those people that have risen over the 2 years, that are community champions, put them on a board and work with them to create the then next level of legislation and regulation for commercial sales and access to allow the creation of the Budweisers, the McDonald's, the Googles of cannabis size companies. But at first instance, the people who have been criminalized, demonized, vilified for decades, we are entitled, and I know that's a very, controversial term these days, but no, we are fucking entitled to be the first to benefit from the cessation of our criminalizing. We shouldn't have our culture stolen from us and co-opted and sold back to us. It's just a fucking farce of an idea. And so I think you're hitting on something really valid there, that again, we're not wanting to just be allowed to break every law and do whatever the fuck we want. We want to be able to follow the same laws as everybody else and be welcomed back into the fold, be re-enfranchised with the society and the culture that we live in, and it's to the benefit of fucking everybody. And as you say, like, yeah, in Section 4, you wouldn't have people driving with fucking huge fat bats. I mean, well, maybe you would, because if they passed it with an impairment test, do you know what I mean? It was exactly, it would then be, everything would be actually evidence-based and relative. So yeah, vote for me for PM, I guess.
I totally agree. I mean, descheduling is the best option. I mean, in fact, really, the complete dismantling of the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971 and the MDR, because, until they actually recognize the harms associated with so-called legal drugs like alcohol, like tobacco, like sugar, which cause more harm and destruction within our society into personal health than all the other drugs combined, until they appreciate that, then, we should have a level playing field in that regard. You have personal autonomy to be able to harm yourself through, overeating or over drinking alcohol or, smoking tobacco, whatever it is, that's your civil right. And, it shouldn't be any different with other substances, especially now all the research into things like MDMA and psilocybin, it'll mess with your brain. Like, it's the same old ideology. And it's like, well, actually, no, now they're finding it helps with your mental health issues. So, it's a big subject that needs to be packed down. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree that descheduling is the answer. But whether we get that or achieve that, especially, I think, we have to do what we can while we still have a Human Rights Act, because that's going to be disappearing pretty soon. So, if there are human rights challenges that can be done, that could lead to even a halfway point for now. Maybe that should be taken on.
I think just getting people to not guilty and stand and try in that's what we need. For too long, you were saying before about with the system, the cops are so used to going, oh, it's over the level, and the person admits guilt. If you admit guilt in this country, they don't need to provide any fucking evidence. They don't need to do anything. You've admitted the charge. Therefore, they don't need to provide any. Okay, it doesn't matter if they've fucked a procedure. It doesn't matter how much they've screwed up or they've fucking set you up. You admitted the fucking thing. It's on record. You're done. It then moves to mitigation. And that's another aspect that I think that you can maybe touch on that some people don't sort of understand, is that on principle, yeah, for all means, stand for fucking not guilty for various offences. But in most instances, probably will end up being sort of convicted for it unless you have that solid defence and case. And even then, there's still going to be potential roadblocks with the judiciary and the general system as it kind of comes to opposition of your stance. But if people then can mitigate the damage and the harm that's done to them by pleading guilty and putting in mitigating circumstances, can you maybe explain that a little bit better for some people?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to think about what guilt is. Guilt is mens rea, criminal intent. So if you criminally intended to do something, and you think that could lead to harm to yourself or others, then you're guilty. But if you disagree with that, then you should really challenge it, and although they try to give you like a third off, it's like, you go into a court these days and it's got like big posters saying, claim your third off today of your conviction by pleading guilty. So it's an oxymoron, like don't fall for it unless, like, I mean, there are always ways. I mean, defenses for people without prescriptions, although you don't have a medical defense in law, there are still ways around these things. If the police haven't followed procedure, so if they've stopped you for something that, for example, they stop you because you're not wearing a seatbelt, right? Now, if the police stop you because you're not wearing a seatbelt, and if the issue is maybe there's some dirt in your seatbelt and it's not pushing in properly, so there's a fault with the seatbelt, and you've had to pull that back off, and you're looking for somewhere to pull in safely so that you can have a look at it and just see if you can sort it out, yeah? Mm-hmm. But the police have pulled you in the meantime. Now, once the police pull you, if they say they're pulling you for a moving traffic offence, which is not wearing a seatbelt, right? If they don't ask you why you're not wearing a seatbelt, so you don't get the opportunity to explain your reasonable excuse for not wearing a seatbelt, then they've breached PACE. That means stopping you from the first instance is unlawful. If that now leads to a swab and an unlawful arrest, which is followed by false imprisonment, then they've breached PACE. And that means even if you refuse a blood sample or you get a blood sample and it's above the limit, it doesn't matter. You'll win your case because of the police not following procedure. There's also, like, once you get the blood test, now that blood test is taken, you're often given a sample as well. If you're not given a sample, they haven't followed procedure. But if they have, that might go into the fridge in the police station, maybe with their lunches and things like that. It might get forgotten about for a bit. They might do something wrong with the labelling. It might get passed from pillar to post. Then it has to be transported to the lab. Then it has to go through all the process of the lab. So you need to follow all the procedures till you get that blood sample result. If those procedures haven't been followed, or if the lab haven't calibrated all of their equipment properly, which has been seen recently, then that evidence can't be used in a court. So that, it's sometimes actually better to plead not guilty and actually, see if you can find any procedural things, and take a bet, really, and like hope that you win. But I mean, we're actually writing a book on this subject at the moment, which I was hoping to have nearly ready now, but unfortunately I've got so many cases I'm working on at the minute. It's a bit on hold. But sometime this year, hopefully in the next few months, this book will be published, and that will go into, what to do if you're stopped, what your rights and responsibilities as a cannabis user are, what your defences are, how to represent yourself in a court, how to prepare for your court case, even how to claim compensation from the police if you feel that you've been unlawfully arrested or falsely imprisoned. So it'll be a really good book, and it will be useful for everybody who uses cannabis, whether you're prescribed or not. So yeah, that is in the works. But if people do get stopped, feel free to contact us. Our website, cedarfuture@mail.com. Send us an email if you've been pulled, and we'll do our best to try and help you and find a defence for you. But yeah, we're always there to help people. So utilise us. Hopefully, we're developing training at the minute for the police. So we're working in conjunction with Global Cannabinoid Solutions to develop an online training course for the police throughout the UK, which will hopefully be every police force throughout the UK. So that will educate them on the legality of medical cannabis, but it will also go into the driving laws and everything. Hopefully we'll be able to also disseminate that to the Crown Prosecution Service, to defence legal firms around the land. But we're also developing maybe training for, we're having a lot of problem where housing associations are threatening to evict people for using their medication, social services, employment, all these different things. So we're looking at a range of education. It's all about education, really, at the end of the day. So if we can educate people and get them to know and understand the situation, hopefully that will stop all of this discrimination happening. But that's really in the realm of prescription holders, and it doesn't do a great deal for non-prescription users at the minute, unfortunately. But we're hoping that we'll keep fighting and we'll get there in the end. But it's a long game.
Yeah, I wonder if there's ways against procedures, all of this bloody legal crap. It's all procedures. It's all very bureaucratic and very cold and callous paperwork. I wonder if there's a way to figure out to protect people within housing associations and whatever under an assumption of their use. Because the assumption by the housing association is that their unlawful cannabis consumption is recreational, it's drug use. Do you know what I mean? I wonder if there's a way then to get it recognized as something else. Because then it would fall out of, because it's the terms and conditions. I mean, this is, if you look in your lease, so some landlords do forget to include it. So do check over your fucking rental agreement, because if they've not included it, they will punish you or remove your tenancy for drug use. Then technically they can't punish you for it because it's not in their contract. Well, I mean, they can obviously bring the cops on you or whatever else, but they then can't withdraw the contract from you for violation of the contract because you didn't violate the contract.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, what I'm hoping is, again, last year we published a document about the Equality Act 2010, mainly for prescription holders. It was Drug Science actually contacted us last summer, and there were like patients who were being refused entry to festivals and so on. And so we put together a document in relation to the Equality Act, basically proving that, to stop somebody using their medical device to administer a medication in public is a breach of their is discrimination relating to a disability under the Equality Act. So we put that together. That's helped a lot of people now, actually, and all of the festival organisers throughout the country have received this document, and it's on their website. So now, hopefully, people shouldn't have any problem using cannabis at festivals. Not that it's normally that big a problem anyway, but what that will do is it creates education amongst the organisers that, it's used medicinally, but it's also helping to break down the barriers of stigma and create normalization. So people are now using our document in pubs. So, you've got people vaping in pubs, you've got people vaping at football stadiums, all sorts of different places, theatres. So, that will create that normalization, that will get rid of stigma throughout society. And that should have an effect on people who don't have prescriptions as well, because there will be more understanding that, it can be used in these different ways. And it's not good enough, but it helps, I think.
You're operating within the space and the sphere of influence that you have currently, and that's commendable and to be sort of respected and applauded, to be fair, because you're having an active impact on I'm gonna fucking strangle this camera. Oh my god, sorry, it's slowly winding me up over the course of this fucking podcast. And your efforts should be sort of commended, because the space that you're operating in means that every day or every week you're impacting somebody's life directly. You're giving them their autonomy back. You're giving them an education and an awareness of their inalienable rights, and to actually then have the confidence to go out and then champion and stand and advocate for cannabis. And I think that's then a brilliant thing. You're also then showing with each action the hypocrisy, the fallacy, the fucking stupidity of the legislation in this country. How a magic piece of paper means that a prescription consumer can consume as much as they fucking want. They can consume while they're driving, and it's absolutely fine. But somebody that, last week I smoked a joint and had an edible, and then I went to the gym this morning and it's sweating out with us and I got caught. And it's the science doesn't. Oh my god! Sorry to anyone just listening to this. This is me freaking out because my camera is just turning on and off and on and off and on and off. So I think that again is brilliant awareness, and that's something that we're not seeing in this artificial binary of medicinal versus adult use. A lot of the medicinal sector organizations are purely medicinal focused, and they're almost predicated on not being adult use. Whereas then to see someone like yourself running an organization that, I suppose for clarity, I'm a part of, in all transparency, I'm a sort of part of, that it is doing this work to work in both camps, as it were, to get rid of this line, this binary, to show that there is no difference. It's just that they're trying to give us very specific language to use in protection, but it also creates alienation. Whereas actually what you're showing is, no, just use the fucking law and you already have that right. You don't need to be, oh no, it's only medical this or medicinal that. No. You are prescribed cannabis. Therefore, you have a lawful right to consume that cannabis as long as you follow the guidelines, as you said, of the practitioner, of the manufacturer. yeah, then you have that lawful defense. And I think that's, again, something that really fucking needs to get into the heads of the 20,000 script holders out there, because I suppose myself included, you can act as your actions are a form of activism moving forward. If you want to sit in that pub for the fucking beer garden and vape away, then yeah, you fighting for that right earns everybody else that fucking right. So this is the thing of it, again, is we're not done in the right way and done with humility and honesty and transparency. Everybody can fight in every direction and widen this bubble from the ground that they're standing on today. We don't need to go and create some artificial frontline battlefield over here through decrim or legal or what. These are, like I said, artificial constructs that are not fully hashed out in order for us to actually be able to debate and discuss them with any reason or meaning. So
yeah. Bravo. Yeah, I think everybody has a responsibility to do their bit, and like directly or indirectly. And, if you've got a prescription, you're very lucky. You a lot of people, would love to be in the position to be able to afford it or have a condition that it can be prescribed for, or, fit the criteria. And, now that you've got that, you need to educate people. You use that. A lot of people tend to hide that they've got a medication, and they're hiding from their landlord and everything. And it's like, don't hide. Explain it to them. Use our documents. Print them out. Show them to them. Explain that. No, this is no different than any other medication.
It's exactly the same as an inhaler. I think is the way that I try and get people to get their heads around it. Is at any point no one can come up to you and go, "Why are you using that inhaler?" It's just not a fucking thing in our etiquette, in our law, anything. It's just not a done practice. Do you know what I mean? And it's drawing it because of the fact that cannabis is so widely used unlawfully or without license, exemption, or authorization, that as it goes more into this medicinal field, the medical apparatus and the field of it, the more it's drawing attention to how stupid the rest of it looks. That you go, somebody just driving down the street popping benzodiazepine, and you think of that, and it's like, yeah, it's absolutely fine. You've got no issue with that. And you then think of, again, anybody anywhere using heroin. It's just like, it tears it all down. It just shows that it's just a fucking farce, that these are neutral, fucking inanimate objects. They are incapable of good or bad. They just exist. And we come along and we do the fucking thing with it. And that's the thing that should be at any point fucking judged, not necessarily lawfully or legally, dealt with, but in terms of then measured. Are you responsible with it? Are you, being a dick in the same way that we don't judge people for sitting in the beer garden having a nice couple of pints, but the guy with his shirt off 5 or 15 pints deep, screaming like a prick, then do you know what I mean? That guy's not representative of the rest of the alcohol consumers. And
it's responsible adult use.
Yeah, and I think that's the crux of it. But the responsible thing needs to come down to, again, the individual. Have you just completely died now?
I think so.
Oh my God. I'm still here. I'm just going to keep fighting with my camera.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's exactly it. It's responsible use, but then the response needs to not be governed or regulated under law. It already is. Do you know what I mean? As we were saying about if you're louder you're causing a public nuisance, that's an arrestable offence.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? If you're being violent in public or whatever, again, it doesn't matter what the substance you might be on is. You are arrested for the violence that you are committing.
Yeah, I mean, or driving while you're tired. That's impairment. That's a Section 4 offence. It doesn't have to be a substance related, or it can be a mobile phone, or you can be your music can be too aggressive, and that could change your cognitive abilities and make you impaired potentially. So it's it just needs a bit of common sense and a bit of logic applied.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I've argued in the past about tobacco, in that if you then are even if a regular tobacco consumer, if you're then first thing in the morning, that's your first cigarette, and maybe you slept for 12, 14 hours, you're going to get that backy rush, as we call it in the North, that kind of tobacco, you kind of feel of lightness, of you're kind of a bit more flustered for a couple of moments.
Yeah. But what changes that and makes you able to drive? Tolerance through repeated use. And it's exactly the same with cannabis.
True, very true. Sorry, I'm just under my desk fighting with this fucking cable.
That's okay.
Oh my God. I don't even think I'm going to edit this out. I'm going to leave it in the fucking podcast. So sorry, folks, you're going to listen to this. I have no idea why it stopped working. Oh, this is so annoying. So what else are you working on, Guy?
I've been, as I mentioned briefly, I've been supporting people with all sorts of issues. So I've got people who are being threatened with being kicked out of their home with kids because they use their prescribed medication. I've got a lad with issues with a hospital where they wouldn't allow him to use his medication in a hospital, which is weird. And that's basically having operationally ill and having to walk like 10, 15 minutes through a hospital out into the freezing cold and wet to use his medication and come back in, which was making him more ill. He was missing appointments with consultants. And their reasoning was that it was a breach of the smoking regulations for the hospital, which is rubbish because it's not smoke and it doesn't fit within the vaping regulations because it's a medical device. And also they said the fire guard said it could set off the fire alarms, which is ridiculous because it's vapor. So like discrimination, like driving one recently, when he was in the back of his van, his girlfriend, who he was with when he got arrested, was heavily pregnant. And the police said to him in the van, if your girlfriend had already had the baby, we'd be contacting social services and get your child taken away from you. This is before the child's even born. And he's saying, what, for taking my medical prescription? This is how mental it all is, there's so many instances. I'm gonna have to write all of this in the book really, but you'd be shocked and surprised at the amount of abuse and discrimination, even for people with a legal prescription, never mind us people who have been campaigning for years who don't have access to such a prescription. So it's almost like they seem to be getting the worst of it at the minute, which is really odd. It's almost, but it's good because it we can create all our education programs around that, and show the severity of these issues and how stupid they are. So that's got to help move us forward with our campaigning.
Yeah. I agree. I was listening, but I'm still fighting with this technology. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I have no idea what is going on with my camera. I cannot get the thing to restart no matter what I do. Give me
I think we've covered most of the information there, so I don't know if you want to call it a close there or.
I've got two more quick questions on my list. Yeah. I'm just so don't know why the fuck I can't get this to work.
The podcast doesn't have to have vision, does it?
I can't begin to understand what is actually happening with this. It's deeply frustrating. Sorry, I'm just breathing so I don't smash this camera.
I was blessed, mate. You'll feel better.
So I suppose I'll just ask the cliched question to the end of this, which I think you've answered before, but I suppose will have probably changed. But yeah, what does the future hold for you?
For Seed Our Future?
For you, for Seed Our Future, yeah.
Well, who knows in this crazy world what the future holds, but yeah, we're just going to keep doing what we do, keep fighting for people's rights, and I had a bit of time out last year. I had to sort of reflect on some things, but I'm full steam ahead this year, and I've got some feelings that some big things are going to happen this year. There are things in the pipeline that I can't really discuss, more for confidentiality and because it's involved in a legal structure. But there are going to be some big events happening this year that could change things quite dramatically. But it's, like any of these things, there's so many variables. It's complicated. We don't know, but, we're going to give it our best shot and see if we can get some laws changed and help people. But as I said, anybody out there listening, we're here to help you. So, please don't feel please do get in touch if you need it. So, yeah.
Nice. I think, good summation, good little teaser for people. Hopefully, obviously, like you say, the various things that you're working on will sort of materialize into something, meaningful and purposeful within the space, and just give us all a bit more breathing room, a bit more of an opportunity to just live our fucking lives without the fear of the cosh, the siren, the cop. It shouldn't be this way. And like I've sort of said, to reiterate, or as I've said previously, and to continually reiterate, just leave us the fuck alone. Stop trying to build an industry on top of us until you've given us freedom. Then come and build your industry. Then we'll show you if you're worthwhile via our fucking wallets. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's it. I think we've just got to keep pushing and keep pushing and looking at all different angles, and we will get there in the end. I mean, you look at the global changes. You look at what's happening in like Germany and Switzerland and Malta and everywhere. I mean, like the legal structures are changing globally, so it's inevitable that it's going to hit the UK at some point. But it's I think, from my perspective, it's making sure it's done like we were discussing before in the right way, and not for the industry, not for commercialism, but for the people and for what the people need. And that's really important. And that's what we've always got to keep in mind.
Exactly. It's what you sort of alluded to before with the essential medicines, is that the state cannot provide access. The private sector cannot provide access. We need to be given an opportunity to provide for ourselves.
Yeah, the NHS is crumbling apart, and there isn't going to be an NHS. They're bringing in all these hubs now. It's all going to be online, the NHS, and they're bringing out all these vaccines for everything. And it's like, it's crumbling. I mean, you just look at all the strikes going on. There isn't an NHS. The workers are disgruntled. They can't cope with the lack of resources, and that's going to hit a head at some point. So really, I mean, and the NHS as well, they're actually advocating for autonomy of health for patients. They say it has to be patient-centered. So if a patient, decides actually this is the best route for me, there shouldn't be interference from the state, especially with the economic and cultural issues at the minute. So, people should be able to just, decide, I mean, me and my wife, we take a lot of supplements. We look after our own health. And, if we think our immune system is down, we'll use like an olive leaf extract or something rather than going and getting some pharmaceuticals. So, there's no difference really. We should be able to look at it. It's nutrition and it's medicine, cannabis. So, we should be able to use it like a brassica vegetable.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think that brings it back to sort of the descheduling of the plant. And the assumption should be that cannabis is anything but a drug, because its myriad of other functions and potential applications mean that it is everything other than a drug. They just can be a drug. It's not to say that cannabis is a drug. It's ridiculous. Fucking paracetamol is a drug. Do you know what I mean? But it's the acacia tree. You can derive then acetophen or whatever it is from it that then makes it. Do you know what I mean? So what I'm saying is basically the two separate things. So we should be left to, in the same way we can produce our own sort of medications or use botanical extracts in nature, the same should then be true of cannabis. As we say, it's an absurdity that we have had to prove that it has medicinal value, and then now we're being fucking taxed effectively as part of a racketeering scheme to pay to be protected. I wish I could show like the kind of the face I'm pulling right now to go along with that. I'm being slightly sarcastic, but also that's interpretable as to what the situation is right now.
Yeah. I mean, there wouldn't be an industry if it wasn't for the community and the campaigners who have been working so hard for decades and ignoring the laws and fighting for the plant. There wouldn't be a CBD industry. There wouldn't be a medical cannabis industry. It's the people who are the pioneers and who have got to where we are. So we have a right to be able to utilize that plant.
100%, brother. 100%. I think as my frustration rises into a fucking crescendo, we'll call the podcast there because I'm going to lose my shit with this camera. I've really enjoyed this conversation, brother. For all of my frustration with my technology, I think it's been very insightful. I think we've really kind of hammered home about sort of the legal medical defense for prescription consumers. Gone into a lot of the nuance and just shown the fallacy, the fucking hypocrisy of all of this. And so, I'll include links to website and papers and stuff below. Anyone wants to fire donations your way, I think it's a brilliant thing to do so, because like you said, the fact that you're helping for free with people at a time when even the clinics are sending people towards you, just shows the validity of the work that you're doing.
Thanks. One last thing I'd like to mention, actually, if you follow us on social media, on Facebook or anything, we did actually publish an online patient survey for patients with prescriptions. A week or two ago. We've only had like 25 responses, but it's really important because it's gathering data on, the different discriminatory effects people are having in public, being pulled by the police in the street, but also it's got quite a few questions into driving. There is an option on there to put your email in, but please don't feel that you have to. It's your option. We're not actually going to keep that data anyway. Just for data protection, but it will gather. It's all confidential, the questions, but the more people can fill this in who either have a prescription at the moment or had a prescription and no longer have one for whatever reason, please do fill it in, because the more data we can collect, we can use that in our training for the police. We can use it in litigation with government departments. So it's important. It only takes 5 minutes of your time.
Yeah, if you drop me the specific link as well, I'll include that in the bio below so people can find that wherever they're listening or watching this podcast. So again, greatly appreciate the work that you're doing, brother. Hopefully it won't be another 12 months before you have her back on again. Like I said, once this kind of salacious little secret of yours can kind of come to light, I think it'd be great to get you on the podcast and discuss what's happening there, because I agree. I think there is scope for some real movement for once in this space.
Yeah, cool. Brilliant. Thank you very much, brother.
Sweet. Peace. It's been a pleasure. I will let you get off and I'll do a bit of housekeeping.
Cool. All right. Cheers.
All right. Peace. Bye.
Peace.
I don't know why I expected to see my face there. I just went a big screen and it's darkness. Let's just quickly wrap this up then, folks. I apologize for whatever is going on with my equipment. I think the gremlins that have been living under my desk for the past several months have probably finally chewed through a fucking wire or two. Apologies for my frustration with this technology. I will hopefully have this fixed for next week's episode, which will feature, I don't know, somebody good. I'm sure it'd be good. It'd be very good. See, I even had to make a paper rustling sound there because you can't see the actions. How can I be funny with no fucking camera here? This must be what it's like to just be an audio listener for all my video folk out there. I apologize. We'll get back to both formats for next week. If you've enjoyed this very frantic and technologically fucking frustrating episode, please do like, share, subscribe. We're nearly there to 1,000 subs. Closer and closer every week we get. So please do give it a subscribe. And if you really enjoyed it, check us out on patreon.com/The Simpa Life, where you can help keep the lights on of this little project and clearly now help me fund a new fucking camera for this little project of mine. All right, folks, I'm completely exhausted with frustration and I will leave you to next week. I hope you found something meaningful, purposeful, entertaining, informative within this week's podcast. Check out Guy and all the links below. I'll see you next week, folks. Peace and love. I even did the peace sign there. There's a peace sign.